Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. It was a Thursday night when the cracks in my marriage finally showed themselves. Claire and I had been together for a decade, with 2 kids, a nice house, and what I thought was a solid relationship. We had our routines, our traditions. She would kiss me goodbye every morning before her commute to the office, and on the rare nights she didn't come home, she'd assure me with a quick text, "Late meeting, staying at the hotel. Love you." I took her words at face value. I had no reason not to. I hadn't given much thought to Claire's trips. She worked in marketing, and travel came with the job. But that Thursday was different. She'd been more distant over the past few weeks, texting less, her words curt and rushed when we spoke on the phone. That night, as she left, her purse clutched tight to her chest, she turned to me at the door with an odd expression, a mix of guilt and something else I couldn't place. "See you tomorrow," she said softly. And with that, she left. For a few minutes, I just stood there, feeling the strange heaviness of her absence. My mind spun. This was Claire, the woman I had built a life with, someone I thought I knew inside out. Why, then, did it feel like I was standing at the edge of a dark, jagged truth I didn't want to see? But I had to. I knew that much. I went to our bedroom and pulled her suitcase from the closet, unzipping it with steady, deliberate movements. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but it didn't take long to find something out of place. Beneath a stack of neatly folded clothes was a silver bracelet I'd never seen. It didn't look like Claire's usual jewelry. Too flashy, a little too romantic for someone who favored practical, understated styles. Alongside it was a hotel receipt from a town 2 hours away, somewhere she had never mentioned. My mind reeled. How long had she been hiding this? Who was she with? I spent the rest of the night staring at the receipt, watching the seconds tick by on my watch as I pieced together what little I could. My stomach churned, my heart beating fast. I could feel the fury building, but I kept it buried. I knew I needed proof. That's the kind of man I am, I don't act on impulse. If I was going to confront Claire, I was going to do it with certainty, with undeniable evidence in hand. I wasn't going to be caught looking like a fool, accusing her with nothing to back it up. The next day, Claire came home, acting like everything was normal. She chatted about her work trip, some supposed conference where she'd been busy networking and dealing with clients. Her face was calm, her voice steady. It almost convinced me, almost. But I'd seen the bracelet, the receipt. She didn't know that I'd started to see her differently, that I was watching her every move now. I waited a week, watching her closely, noting her habits, every odd glance at her phone, every time she left the room to take a call. I bided my time, unwilling to tip my hand. I scrolled through our phone bills online, noticing a new number with a different area code. That number appeared again and again, right around the time she'd claimed she was out late or on a work trip. Each time I saw it, my anger grew colder, harder, settling deep in my chest. I knew then that this wasn't a one-time slip-up. Claire was hiding something big. After a while, I felt like I was in 2 worlds. One was the world everyone else saw, the devoted husband, the doting father, the man who was solid as a rock. But the other world was where I spent most of my nights, drowning in suspicions and questions that had no easy answers. I combed through Claire's emails, snooping in places I never thought I'd go. Every time I found another piece of evidence, it felt like a punch to the gut. But I didn't act. I could have confronted her, could have accused her in the middle of one of our routine family dinners, let the fury spill out, let her know I was onto her. But I wanted something else. Something bigger. A part of me, dark and calculating, wanted her to feel the weight of my silence, to let her walk around with the illusion of her lies intact while I gathered everything I needed. Then came our 10th anniversary. I knew she'd been planning a party for us, gathering friends and family to celebrate the milestone, to paint a picture of us as the perfect couple. The irony wasn't lost on me. I watched her go through the motions of planning, acting as if we were just like any other happy couple. I knew that whatever I was going to do, it had to be on that day. There was something poetic about exposing her betrayal on the very day she was celebrating our love. The night of the party, our home filled with friends, laughter, and music. Claire had gone all out with decorations, food, the works. She was dazzling, a smile plastered across her face, her laughter ringing out as she flitted from guest to guest. Watching her, you'd never suspect the secrets she was hiding. But I knew, and that knowledge burned inside me, fueling the plan I'd spent weeks preparing. When it came time for the toast, Claire handed me a glass of champagne, beaming as she looked up at me. "To us," she said softly, and I gave her a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I tapped my glass with a spoon, drawing everyone's attention, and then cleared my throat. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Claire and I couldn't be more grateful to have each of you here to celebrate this special occasion." There was a pause as I looked out at our friends and family, the people who had supported us through the highs and lows of life. Claire's hand tightened around mine, her grip firm, perhaps sensing that something was off, though she had no idea what was coming. "I want to toast to my wife, the woman who stood by me for the past decade," I continued, my voice steady, almost too calm. "The woman who has kept a secret I've only recently discovered." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Claire's smile froze, her fingers slipping from mine as she stared up at me, confusion giving way to a flash of panic in her eyes. "I won't bore you all with the details," I said, letting my gaze settle on Claire, watching as the realization dawned. "But I wanted to let you know that tonight marks more than just an anniversary for us. Tonight, I'm also marking the end of an era." Claire's face drained of color, her mouth opening slightly as if to protest, but she said nothing. Around us, our friends and family exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering, others standing in stunned silence. "Let's raise our glasses," I said, lifting my champagne in the air, my gaze still locked on hers. "To new beginnings." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her world crashing down around her. For once, I didn't care what she or anyone else thought. I'd spent too long carrying the weight of her lies, the burden of her betrayal. As I stepped out of the house, the cold night air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. And as I walked away, I knew that this was just the beginning of my freedom. After leaving the house that night, I drove to a quiet place down by the water, an old dock where I used to come when life got too heavy. The echoes of what I'd just done, calling out Claire's betrayal in front of our closest friends and family, still clung to me, a strange mix of satisfaction and hollowness. I'd always thought revenge would feel more powerful, like an antidote, but all it did was expose how deep her betrayal had sunk into me. I sat in the car, headlights off, just watching the water lap up against the shore, trying to make sense of the chaos I'd unleashed in my own life. This wasn't supposed to be how things went. 10 years ago, Claire and I had been inseparable. We'd shared the kind of dreams that felt permanent, like they'd never falter. But somewhere along the line, things had changed. She drifted, hiding parts of herself from me that I could never reach, and I had become too complacent, trusting her without question. The silence of the night was thick, almost comforting, a balm to the harsh reality I'd created for myself. I could see it all now, the shocked faces at the party, the horrified silence as I'd exposed her lies in one fell swoop. I wondered if Claire had stayed to explain herself or if she'd bolted the moment I left. Did she even care what our friends and family thought? Would she have the guts to admit the truth, or would she spin some version of events that painted her as the victim? My gut told me she'd try to save face, but at this point, it didn't matter. Everyone knew the truth now. The vibration of my phone jolted me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Claire. "Claire ***, we need to talk. Please come home ***." I stared at the screen, the request feeling hollow, almost pathetic after what she'd done. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave her waiting in the dark for as long as she'd left me. But I knew that eventually, I'd have to face her. If I wanted to move forward, if I wanted a clean break, I needed to hear her admit it, to finally own up to what she'd done. I took my time driving back, letting the anger simmer just beneath the surface. By the time I walked into the house, she was waiting for me, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She looked at me with an expression that was almost pleading, as if somehow, she could undo the damage by looking pitiful enough. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop myself, sharper than I'd intended. Why did you do it, Claire? She opened her mouth, and for a moment, I thought she'd try to deny it, but then she simply looked down, defeated. I don't know, she whispered. I really don't, Thomas. Don't lie to me. Not now. I could feel my voice rising, but I didn't care. I needed to hear the truth, needed her to strip away the excuses and just tell me, even if it was painful. I was lonely, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You've been so distant, so busy with work, with the kids, everything. I felt like I was losing you, like I was invisible. So you thought the best way to fix that was to have an affair? I felt a surge of bitterness rise up, an ugly, jagged thing that threatened to consume me. Did you even consider talking to me about it? I tried, she said, her voice trembling. But every time I brought it up, you'd brush it off, say we'd talk about it later, that you had things to handle first. So that was your solution? I asked, unable to keep the disgust from my voice. Sneaking around, lying to me, to everyone. It wasn't supposed to go this far. She looked away, her fingers twisting nervously. I thought maybe it would just be a distraction. Something to keep me from feeling so empty all the time. Her words felt like knives, each one slicing deeper. How long, Claire? The question felt like a betrayal of myself, a twisted need to know just how far back her deceit went. She hesitated, glancing up at me, her face pale. Almost a year. The weight of it hit me, solid and unrelenting. Almost a year. A whole year of my life that had been a lie, every moment with her tainted by this hidden affair. And the kids? Did you even think about them while you were off with him? She flinched, looking down at the floor. I thought I could keep it separate. That it wouldn't have to affect them, or us. Separate? The word burned in my throat. You don't get to compartmentalize this, Claire. You don't get to decide which parts of your life are tainted and which ones stay clean. That's not how it works. She took a shaky breath, her gaze lifting to meet mine. I know I've hurt you. I know what I did was wrong. But, can we fix this? Can we try to start over? The question hung in the air, almost absurd in its simplicity. Start over. Did she honestly think it was that easy, that we could just hit a reset button and erase everything? No, Claire, I said, my voice rough, exhausted. We can't just pretend this didn't happen. You broke something. You broke us, and I don't think it can be fixed. Her face crumpled, and she looked away, a small, strangled sob escaping her lips. But I felt no sympathy, no desire to comfort her. She'd made her bed, and now she'd have to lie in it, alone. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to say next. I'm filing for divorce. She gasped, her eyes wide, the reality of it finally sinking in. Thomas, please. Don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've built. Everything we've built. I repeated, the irony bitter on my tongue. You're the one who threw it away, Claire. You did this, not me. For a moment, she looked like she was going to argue, but then she just sank into the chair, defeated, her shoulders slumped. What about the kids? We'll figure it out, I said, my voice firm. They're young, but they're strong. They'll get through this, just like I will. But I can't stay with you, Claire. I can't live with this shadow over us. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to them. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of the decision settling over both of us. She finally nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'll move out, she whispered. I'll give you space. I didn't say anything, just watched as she stood, gathering herself, her face a mask of sorrow and regret. She walked to the door, hesitating one last time before looking back at me. I'm so sorry, Thomas. For everything. But her apology fell flat, empty, like an echo of something that once held meaning but was now stripped of all value. I just looked at her, unfeeling, as she walked out, closing the door behind her with a soft, final click. As the silence settled, I felt a strange sense of peace, a calmness that came from knowing that I'd made the right decision. She was gone, and so was the weight of her betrayal. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. For the next few days, I moved through life in a blur, adjusting to the absence of Claire's presence in the house. The kids were confused, their little faces filled with questions they were too young to articulate. I tried to keep things as normal as possible, tried to shield them from the ugly truth. They didn't need to know the details, not yet. They only needed to know that their dad was here for them, that he wasn't going anywhere. But even as I settled into this new reality, there was still a part of me that needed closure, a final piece of this puzzle that I hadn't quite grasped. Claire had hurt me, betrayed me, but it wasn't enough to simply let her go. I needed to understand the why of it all, to confront the man who had been so willing to destroy my family without a second thought. So I did some digging. It didn't take long to find him, a fellow marketing executive from her firm, a smooth-talking charmer named Evan who lived just a few miles away. I looked up his social media, scrolled through photos of him grinning at work events, posing with clients, the kind of guy who seemed to thrive on attention and flattery. One night, after the kids were asleep, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice slick, almost smug. "Hello. This is Thomas," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Claire's husband." There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath on the other end. There was a heavy silence on the line as I let the weight of my words settle. On the other end, Evan, the man who'd wormed his way into my life and nearly dismantled it from within, was quiet, his shallow breathing the only sound as he registered who I was. For a moment, I wondered if he would hang up, try to dodge this confrontation the way he'd slithered into my life without remorse. But then he spoke. "Thomas." He hesitated, his voice forced and careful. "I didn't expect you to call. You didn't expect a lot of things, Evan." My voice was calm, a strange steadiness in my tone that even surprised me. "But I don't think I'm asking for much. Just an explanation. I want to know why you thought it was okay to do this. To take what didn't belong to you, to go after my family." He stammered a bit, then sighed. "Look, I know how it must seem, and I'm sorry for the way things turned out. But I didn't set out to hurt anyone. It just happened." The excuse was so pathetic, so hollow, that I almost laughed. "It just happened," I repeated. "You call carrying on a year-long affair with a married woman something that just happens? You really think that's how the world works?" "Look," he started, his voice slipping into that defensive tone, a rehearsed explanation he'd probably spun 100 times before. "Claire and I connected, okay? I didn't expect it, but I don't know. She made it sound like things with you were dead. Like you were just coasting through life. She said she felt invisible, neglected." My grip on the phone tightened, and I fought the urge to yell. The blame shifting was so transparent it was almost laughable. "So you thought you'd step in, fill that gap?" I asked, barely able to contain my anger. "She's married, Evan. You knew that, and it didn't matter to you." "Hey," he shot back, his voice hardening, probably finally realizing he had nothing to lose. "Don't act like you're blameless here. She wouldn't have looked elsewhere if things were good at home. People don't just cheat for no reason. Maybe not, I said coldly. But I've been here, dealing with the fallout while you carry on like you're untouchable. You've got no right to lecture me about my marriage, especially when you were just using her. There was silence on his end, and I could almost picture his smug expression slipping, giving way to the nervousness he was probably hiding. I'm not saying it was right, he finally muttered. But you weren't there for her. She needed someone, and, yeah, I was there. Congratulations, then, I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. You were there. But you don't have to worry about her anymore. She's all yours if you want her because I'm done. I just wanted you to know that I'm done cleaning up the mess you made. The silence stretched again, long and uncomfortable. I could almost feel him struggling with what to say, grasping for anything that would make this conversation end on his terms, not mine. But there was nothing. For once, he was out of words. I guess there's nothing left to say then, he muttered, finally sounding defeated. No, there isn't, I replied, my voice hard. Not for you, anyway. With that, I hung up, feeling an odd sense of closure as I set the phone down. The conversation had left a bitter taste in my mouth, but I felt strangely free, as though I'd finally exorcised some lingering ghost from my life. Evan was out there, probably stewing in his own self-pity, but I didn't care. He wasn't my problem anymore, and neither was Claire. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work and taking care of the kids. Claire had moved in with a friend, claiming she wanted to give me space. I didn't argue. Her absence was a relief, a quiet void in the house that let me finally breathe without the weight of her betrayal hanging over me. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Claire standing on the doorstep, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale and drawn. For a moment, I just stared at her, unsure of what she wanted, why she was here. Thomas, she began, her voice trembling. Can we talk? I stepped aside, letting her in, though every fiber of me wanted to tell her to go. She looked around the house as if she hadn't seen it in years, her gaze lingering on the photos of the kids, the little traces of our life together that still clung to the walls. What do you want, Claire? I asked, my voice neutral. She took a shaky breath. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to try to explain. I was lonely, Thomas. You were always working, and it felt like you didn't even see me anymore. Like I was just, here, fading away. Her words stirred something in me, something painful and raw, but I kept my expression blank. So your solution was to start an affair? I asked, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. She flinched, but nodded. I know it sounds selfish, but I needed someone who made me feel wanted. And Evan, he was there. Until he wasn't, I said flatly. Her face crumpled, and she looked down, shame etched across her features. He left me. Said it was too complicated, that he didn't want to ruin his life over this. He said he was just looking for a distraction. A small, bitter part of me felt a grim satisfaction, but I didn't let it show. So now you're here, I said, crossing my arms. Looking for what, exactly? Sympathy? Forgiveness? No, she whispered, her voice small. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. The sincerity in her voice took me off guard, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, the one I'd built a life with. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I appreciate the apology, Claire, I said quietly. But it doesn't change anything. You made a choice, and now we both have to live with the consequences. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded, accepting my words with a kind of defeated grace. I understand, she murmured. I wish I could go back. Undo everything. We all wish for things, Claire. But you can't unmake what you've done. She wiped a tear from her cheek, looking down at the floor. I know. But if there's anything I can do to make things right, just tell me. I'll do whatever it takes. I thought about her offer, about the small shred of redemption she seemed to be seeking. But I knew better. There was nothing she could do to fix what was broken, no way to erase the hurt and betrayal. All I wanted was to move on, to leave this painful chapter behind me. There's nothing you can do, Claire, I said, my voice firm. Just focus on being a good mother to the kids. They're going to need you, and I'll make sure they have everything they need. But as for us, it's over. She nodded, a quiet acceptance settling over her. For a moment, she lingered, as if hoping I'd change my mind, but when I didn't, she turned and left without another word. After she was gone, I sank into the armchair, a strange sense of calm washing over me. The pain was still there, a dull ache that throbbed beneath the surface, but it felt less oppressive, less consuming. For the first time, I felt like I could see a path forward, a way out of the tangled mess she'd left behind. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I threw myself into work, rediscovering the joy I'd once felt in my career, the sense of purpose that had faded over the years. I spent more time with the kids, taking them to the park, helping them with their homework, becoming the father I'd always wanted to be. And slowly, the wounds began to heal. The anger, the resentment, the bitterness, they faded, replaced by a quiet resilience, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Claire had broken something in me, but she hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, ready to face whatever came next. One evening, as I sat with the kids, watching them laugh and play, I realized that I was finally free. Free from the weight of betrayal, from the darkness that had clouded my life for so long. And as I looked at their smiling faces, I knew that I'd found something more valuable than revenge, something worth more than any grudge or grievance. I had found peace. Months passed in quiet. The sting of Claire's betrayal dulled, though its scars lingered, etched deep. I'd moved forward, at least, that's what I told myself. My days were a series of routines, work, picking up the kids, making sure everything at home ran smoothly. It was a life filled with structure, but in the absence of chaos, I was content. I had my children, my career, and a newfound resilience. I believed I was finally free. Then one cold November morning, the kind that clings to your skin and seeps into your bones, I received a phone call that would shatter everything I'd rebuilt. "Mr. Thomas Edwards," the voice on the other end asked. "Yes, speaking," I replied, unsure if it was a solicitor or some other routine matter. "This is Officer Phillips from County Police." There was a brief pause, the silence hanging ominously. "There's been an accident involving your wife, Claire. We need you to come down to the station." The words echoed in my mind, reverberating like a relentless, cold wind. Claire. We hadn't spoken in months, except for brief exchanges about the kids. She'd rented a small apartment in town and seemed to be managing on her own. But the tone in Officer Phillips' voice left little room for hope. "Is she?" I asked, my throat tightening as I fought to form the question. The officer's silence told me more than any words could. I was at the station in under 20 minutes, my thoughts swirling as I parked and walked in, steeling myself for what awaited me. Officer Phillips led me into a small, private room where I was met with solemn faces and cold, unfeeling words. Claire had been involved in a head-on collision on the highway late last night. She'd lost control on the icy roads and crashed. The paramedics had done what they could, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. The news hit like a sledgehammer. I'd spent so much time resenting her, feeling vindicated in my anger and betrayal. But as the realization of her death washed over me, I felt something new, a strange and aching emptiness. I'd never wished her harm. I'd wanted to move on, to be free, but not like this. They handed me her belongings, a small purse, her phone, a locket I'd given her years ago. Inside was a picture of us with the kids, taken one summer on a family vacation. Her face in the photo radiated joy, a moment frozen in time when things were simpler, when the world seemed solid, unbreakable. I clutched it, the edges pressing into my hand, grounding me as I fought to keep myself composed. Once home, I called the kids' school to let them know I would be picking them up early. I wasn't ready to tell them yet, but I wanted them close. I spent the morning in a daze, sorting through Claire's things, trying to process the reality of her death. Among her things was a worn leather-bound journal, filled with pages of familiar handwriting. I hesitated, but curiosity and a lingering sense of closure compelled me to open it. The first few pages were filled with musings about our life together, simple moments that seemed almost surreal to read now. Then, as I turned to more recent entries, I found entries written around the time of her affair with Evan. Her words were raw, conflicted, a chaotic tangle of guilt and sorrow. I'm so ashamed of what I've done. I wish I could take it back, wish I'd just told him the truth about how I was feeling. Thomas doesn't deserve this. I know he doesn't. But I feel so alone, so disconnected. I want to find my way back to him, but I don't know how. Her words tore at something deep within me. She'd tried, in her own way, to reconcile her actions, to justify them, but ultimately she had felt lost, searching for a connection she thought was gone. The thought twisted painfully in my chest. Despite everything, she'd loved me. The next pages were filled with apologies she'd never had the chance to say, lines crossed out and rewritten, as if she couldn't find the words that would make her wrongdoing forgivable. And then, near the end, the entries became brighter, hopeful. Thomas deserves happiness, and I want to find it too. I know I messed up, but maybe one day we can both move forward, even if not together. Maybe we can be friends again. Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest. I'd spent months building walls between us, closing myself off, trying to erase her from my life. But now that she was gone, I realized how much of her I'd held on to. My grief was raw, an open wound, and it consumed me as I thought of the future we'd never have, of all the unresolved things between us that would now remain forever unspoken. In the days that followed, I struggled to pick up the pieces. I kept busy with funeral arrangements, leaning on family and friends to help me through the numbness that had taken hold. The kids, though confused, were resilient, holding each other close as we navigated our grief together. The night before the funeral, I went into the kids' room, sitting on the edge of their bed as they slept. I realized that all they would remember of Claire would be the broken pieces of her, the fragments of a woman who had made mistakes but had still been their mother. They deserved more than that. They deserved to remember the woman who had loved them with everything she had. At the funeral, as I stood at the podium, I looked out over the faces of friends and family, of people who had known Claire in all her forms, the friend, the colleague, the woman I had once called my wife. I spoke of the good times, of the laughter we'd shared, the life we'd built, even if it hadn't lasted the way we'd planned. I told them how, despite the pain and the mistakes, she had been a woman who had loved deeply, who had fought to find happiness even when it eluded her. And then, with a quiet resolve, I spoke of forgiveness. Forgiveness not just for her, but for myself, for the anger, the resentment, the part of me that had closed off to her when she'd needed me most. I hadn't been perfect, but I was ready to let go, to remember her as she had once been, to allow my children to see the good in her even through the haze of her mistakes. As I stepped down, I felt a strange peace settle over me, a bittersweet release that felt like the closing of a long, painful chapter. I took the kids' hands, holding them close as we said our final goodbyes. In the end, there was no victory, no grand triumph. Only a quiet, fragile acceptance that life would continue, that I would find a way to carry her memory with me, not as a source of pain, but as a testament to the love we had once shared, to the family we had built together. As we walked away from her grave, the cold November wind whipping around us, I looked down at the kids and made a promise to myself, to be the father they needed, to be a man who could show them that love, even in its imperfection, was worth holding on to. Claire was gone, but in her absence, I found a strength I didn't know I had, a strength that would carry me through the years ahead, a strength that would allow me to love, to forgive, and, maybe one day, to start again.